The next organelle that we're going to look at is the mitochondrion. Mitochondrion is singular, mitochondria is plural, and so I pretty much use the word mitochondria. The job of the mitochondria, or the function of the mitochondria, is to take the sugar, glucose, and break it down into energy that the cell can use. The cell cannot use glucose directly for all of the different chemical reactions that occur. You remember when we were talking about chemical reactions and I said all chemical reactions take energy, right? And our bodies, trillions and trillions of chemical reactions constantly, and our bodies need energy to do that. And so we take in food, and some of the food, the carbohydrates, we take in and break it down into glucose, but glucose then has to be broken down into something that the cell can use. And that is called cellular energy, and it is in the form of ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. You don't need, notice I didn't write that right now. You don't need to know that at this moment, but here it is written for you. And that's what the cell can use directly. But how does the cell make that? Through an organelle called the mitochondria. Okay? Where do you find mitochondria? Mitochondria are located in all eukaryotic cells. So the plants, the animals, the protists, and the fungi that we've already talked about. Okay? Here's the chemical reaction that takes the glucose that plants make and turns it ultimately into 36 usable molecules of ATP. So we take the glucose, our cells take the glucose plus oxygen that we breathe in, and we produce water and carbon dioxide from this reaction. Then this further makes ATP, or energy, that the cells can use. The mitochondria also have circular chromosomes of DNA in order to build its own proteins. And if anything is going to build its own proteins, then it's also going to need to have their own ribosomes. So the mitochondria are also able to make their own ribosomes in order to make the proteins that they need. Okay, so again, we see that the ribosomes are two parts, two subunits. We can see here that the mitochondria have some DNA. When you look at, so I'll come back to that one in a second. When you look at the diagram of a mitochondria, and it is usually typically drawn like this, you'll see kind of like something that looks like a kidney shape, right? Kind of kidney bean kind of thing. And then inside of it, it's got all of these folds in it. Now the folds are really important because the folds along this membrane right here is where the chemical reaction occurs. And so if we increase how much of this location of chemical reaction can occur, if we can increase that, then we would have more places that reactions can occur, and we would be making more energy for the cell. So if you look at the inside of a mitochondria, or mitochondrion for singular, you'll see that it's got all of these folds, right? That increases the surface area, the places where the chemical reactions can occur. If we also look in here, we can see that it has the strands of DNA, right? That it needs to be able to make its own proteins, and if it's going to make its own proteins, then we also need to have the little ribosomes. Okay, so these folds are important. They're called cristae, and as I said, they're important because they increase surface area where the reactions take place in order to make the ATP from the glucose. And so here's the cristae. As we've already talked about a bit, many of the components in a eukaryotic cell have the double membrane, right? And so here's an example of what that might look like. We have the glycerol, which is a protein. I'm sorry, not a protein. We have the glycerol, which is a carbohydrate head, right? And we have those, they're called phospholipids. They're made of lipids. And the phospholipid tails face each other, and the carbohydrates heads face away. And this is really important because that makes the inside of this bilayer. Bi means two, and it's just a layer. So just one side is a layer, two sides like that is a bilayer. Bi means two. Anyway, the inside of the bilayer is going to be hydrophobic, while the outside portions are hydrophilic. We're going to be talking about this more. When you have what is known as a hydrogen ion, that is known as a proton. Okay, and so we can see that there are protons that are going to be trapped in between the space. This is going to be important for being able to produce the ATP. Okay, and there is the video on the mitochondria.